Good morning. I'm Donna Sanford with the Virtual Edge, and I would like to welcome you to this morning's session on webinars and webcasting. I think it's a great session to put some things in perspective. I know a lot of people are looking at virtual events for the first time, and they think that a virtual event has to be a big trade show floor, a big involved process, and sometimes that works and sometimes that's what you need, but sometimes webinars and webcasting are actually a better option for you. So I want to introduce our speakers who will speak to that topic. Aaron Cole is with Clear Skies Virtual Event Producers, and John Janesheg, the CEO of World to World. And I'm going to remind the virtual audience that the Twitter feed for this room is VES220W, as in dog, and I will be monitoring the questions from the virtual audience, and we'll make sure the speakers address them. So, gentlemen, if you want to start.
Okay. Donna, thank you very much. And I'm Aaron. This is John. It's nice to talk with all of you today.
Hi, everybody.
As Donna was mentioning, we're going to take a little bit of a step back and really address webinars and webcasting and how we feel they represent a very good and strong value for what you're looking to do if you're looking to get into this environment. If you've been going to a lot of the other summits and seminars yesterday and then today, you're learning quite a lot about 3D environments, and those are obviously very collaborative, very engaging environments. However, at their core, when we're talking about content delivery and messaging and collaboration, those environments still rely predominantly on webcasts and webinars as a form of content in terms of getting that message across. And so what we're going to talk about is we're going to really make the argument for you that the true value of what we do for a living and what you can adopt is in that collaborative environment. It's really focused to that content delivery and the collaboration that can happen within that content delivery itself, which is of course the webinars and the webcasting platforms. So as you all are aware, since you're at this environment and since you're at this conference, you know the degree of adoption that webinars and webcasts have accomplished within the marketplace. Because of their unique ability to collaborate, their unique ability, they're almost an infinitely malleable messaging tool. They're able to really address any and all needs that you might be looking to accomplish when you're looking to take what you're doing to an online program. And it's really that unique ability to communicate, to collaborate, and to inform is really what the key of what we're doing. And again, that's really where the value is. That's really where we feel the strongest return for your investment is going to be, is in that collaborative environment. It's when you're talking and engaging people, when you're pushing your information and you're getting to that level of a collaborative two-way communication. That's truly where the value is, and that's really what webcasts and webinars truly accomplish. So really when you take a look at this and you really take a step back and assess what this technology does, it really benefits anybody. It's really malleable and able to accomplish just about any kind of thing that you might be looking to accomplish in a virtual environment. And that's why we're obviously strong believers in the technology and what it does. So for today, we're going to briefly take a step back and we're going to talk through some of the definitions and terminology. A lot of you I know have been in this environment before, but there's some things that I think we want to talk through just to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page. We're going to talk about where the market is now, and if you're not in the market, if you're not using webinars and webcasts in your marketing strategy, probably a better question that you should be asking yourselves is, what are my competitors doing? Chances are your competitors are in this environment right now, and chances are they're making use of this technology. And it's essential that you kind of take a look at that and assess your needs from there. We're very excited to be able to share some market surveys that our friends at the 1080 Group have put together. If you're not familiar with the 1080 Group, they're an organization that is really focused on looking at and determining and assessing where this marketplace is headed, and then coming up with ideas and best practices to kind of engage that. So our thanks to our friends at the 1080 Group for being able to provide that for you. And then we're going to take a look at assessing your needs and really thinking about how do you take this delivery model and develop it into a strategy that's going to work for what you're looking to do. There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. We're going to talk through some. We don't have time today, unfortunately, to talk to all of them, but there's a lot of things that we're going to hopefully highlight to provide some value for you as well. So let's talk about some of the common pieces of the puzzle here real quickly. Common language terms. Talked a little bit about trade shows. You all, I know, are familiar with that. And really the webinar, as I mentioned when I started out, the webinar is really focused. It's that very established, concise method of content delivery on an online collaborative environment. That's really where you're pushing your content, and that's really where the key to collaboration comes from, is in that environment where you're able to present your information, you're able to leave takeaways, or you're able to really engage the audience. And that's, again, what we truly feel the value is at, and the use case of webinars excels in. One-to-many and one-to-few. These are probably things that you might have heard of in other marketing means, but they're important for us to talk about today and at least get a good understanding of them. And this can also help you if you're looking to get into this environment. This is a good question for you to begin to think about in terms of who your audience is and how you're going to be projecting to them. Because that can help determine platform technology. That can help determine some of the tools that you might be using when you're talking about adopting this information. One-to-many refers to one or a few presenters speaking to many, tens, hundreds, potentially thousands of people online, and therefore one-to-few is that same group of presenters but speaking to a relatively smaller, more intimate type of a group, and that would be more indicative of trainings, where there typically is a lot more in the way of collaboration, breakout rooms, open chat, those kind of things that are typically utilized in a more intimate type of a setting. One-to-many, obviously, because of the physical nature of projecting to a large, again, potentially thousands of people. One-to-many tends to be a little bit less in the collaboration and more focused on the content delivery. Webinar and webcast, that can sometimes be a little bit of a gray definition, but I thought it would be good for us to spend just a couple minutes talking about that here real quickly. Webcast, from our standpoint, you can typically think of a webcast as a streaming type of a media that typically originates in a studio, possibly a trade show like we're at here today, or some other environment where there's a fairly substantial video content with collaboration, obviously, to some degree. PowerPoint slides or content obviously involved in that. That typically is a one-to-many type of an aspect in terms of how it's designed. Webinars can have that same or some of those same pieces to them. Obviously you can have video, you can have obviously a one-to-many type of a design for a webinar. But the keys to be able to walk in that technology are typically easier to attain. You don't need to necessarily start this off from a studio. You don't need to necessarily be at a trade show like today to be able to execute a professional webinar. And so in some ways the webinars, as they've evolved and they've become more of a streaming environment as well, they have become more, in some ways, user-friendly and more adaptive to the marketplace in general. Combination events, lastly, real quickly here, or what we also refer to as hybrid events. We kind of look at combination events as the gateway drug for webinars and webcasts. It's really how a lot of companies will come into this environment and really kind of utilize and discover what the potential benefits of using this technology is. It's through that need of having to accomplish and bridge that live in-person to virtual type of an environment that really is where companies first get into this environment, and they discover that it works, and they discover that it works very well, and they begin to apply that towards other things that they might be looking to do from a marketing standpoint. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about some of the key kind of terms, let's take a look at the marketplace and kind of get some ideas about where this market is, where it's going, what can we expect it to do, for instance, what works in this marketplace. And we don't need to sit here and tell you that this is an incredibly booming growing marketplace. It's obviously thriving. A statistic I recently read projected the increase of webinars increasing by 35% annually, which is a very healthy growth rate. That's obviously something that we all like to see, and it's kind of indicative of the adoption levels of this technology in terms of the business market. I'm always interested in looking at how are webinars used, how are webinars going to be utilized within the business and association communities. This particular study pointed to a third of webinars being designed for the kind of one-to-many aspect where you've got an e-marketing or lead generation type of an atmosphere. An equal third of those in this study were reflected of using technology to do trainings and online seminars, which again goes to that one-to-few type of an environment. And then in this particular survey there was an 8% category that came through talking about corporate events and meetings. There's a fairly large other aspect of this survey, and I'd love to find out a little bit more about that because it's always interesting to see where technology is growing and how people are using this as they go through. This is a study that was, this is again from our friends at the 1080 group, talking about what is the overall adoption of webinars and webcasts within the environment, and this was surveyed of business professionals on their uses or their experience of webcasts in general. Right off the bat, 59% have attended a webinar, 21% have presented at least once, 10% are actively using webinars and webcasts as a method of content delivery, 1% calls themselves professionals, and that leaves us about 9% that have not used webinars before in a professional environment. But when you look at this, it's pretty astounding. 91% of people in this survey, business professionals, have used webinars, either attended or been a part of them or presented in them. And that's a phenomenal adoption rate when you really step back and think about that. And of those 91%, having a full third of those that are actually actively using this technology, it's a very good indication of the level of adoption and a very good snapshot of why this technology works and why so many people are using this technology as a means of transparent content delivery. And that's really key. That's one of the big things that we're always talking about in terms of how webinars work as they go through. So, and why is that? What are some of the pieces, and why is that 91% of business community professionals and association professionals are using this technology? This is there's several things on the slide here that kind of talk through what some of the usual use cases and why they're so generally effective. Probably the most important one is the very top one, that increased interaction with attendees. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's that collaboration, it's that engagement that really is what's key here. We're no longer in some ways blindly throwing content or marketing material to an audience on a one-way type of a stream. Webinars have revolutionized that because now we're able to effectively have a two-way communication through collaboration, through polling, through feedback. We're able to actually engage the audience, and that's really what one of the ultimate keys of a general marketing plan is that level of engagement. It's bringing the audience into what you're talking about and engaging them. So that's very much key. Having another point, having the webinars and webcasts typically be a fairly concise length, usually about a 60-minute webinar is fairly common. That's a reasonable ask to go to a business professional and ask them to take 60 minutes out of their business day to come and listen to what you might be talking about, get your content, takeaways, and then walk out and then go back to your daily job. That 60-minute time frame is fairly reasonable to ask of them, and as long as you've got the correct materials ahead of them to really engage them and get them excited about it, that's an argument that you can make. And that's another reason why we feel webinars and webcasts represent such a solid return on what you're investing in this marketplace. Is because the ask of what you're asking the attendees to do to participate are relatively minor. I mentioned a minute ago takeaways and handouts. Anything that is getting to address that what's in it for me type of aspect for your attendees is key. Takeaways, handouts, PowerPoint, PDFs of the slides, things like that are always good marketing things, and that's another reason why they work. A lot of companies have obviously started to use this technology from the standpoint of accreditation and online seminars. That's another huge thing that's taking off. People are understanding and realizing that this is an effective way to teach. This is an effective way to accredit, populations and accredit business professionals. Scalability, another big one. Cost is a huge one, and obviously the reduced travel is kind of a no-brainer. But a lot of companies that we talk to on a regular basis, the infrastructure and the cost to implement a 3D environment at this point is still fairly prohibitive, whereas for the cost of a webinar, those are relatively cheap, and those are relatively easy ways to integrate and ways to again make use of this technology. For the cost of a webinar, it's quite reasonable in terms of what you're getting out of it from your return. Data mining is something that a lot of people typically do not initially start thinking about when they're looking at implementing this technology, but it's incredibly important. With what webinars provide you in terms of your knowledge base for your attendees, data mining can represent a huge vehicle for you to improve what you're doing, to learn more about your attendees and who they are, what their likes are, what their demographic information is, and all of that can help build your campaign, moving forward as you go through. And lastly, real quickly, social marketing. That's a change that is affecting everything around us. It's affecting our professional, our personal lives, and webinars and webcasts' ability to interface and adopt those changes and incorporate those changes is really something very large. A lot of the major webcasting and webinar companies and providers, if you happen to look, are making adoptions and coming out with updates that incorporate social marketing technology. And that's truly a very important thing that webinars have the ability to really accomplish and take and build upon. And that's only going to increase. So that's another reason why webinars work. And so really what it boils down to is when you take a look at this and you take a step back and you realize that some of the stuff that we've been talking about here so far has the originations in a basic marketing plan, but it's obviously taking this to the next level. It's taking what you already know about marketing and applying it to a virtual online premise. And that really, when we start talking about that really gets to where we feel the core abilities and the core strengths of what a webinar and a webcast will do, is taking that to the next level. And in that sense, the goal of a webcast is truly no different than any other communication mediums. The goal is to truly become transparent, to engage your attendees and to allow them to focus exclusively on your message. That transparency is key. That transparency is what, when they're done right, webinars and webcasts do. And that's exactly why they can be such a valuable aspect with what you might be doing from a marketing standpoint and an educational standpoint. Allowing people to focus on what you're doing, focus through that collaboration. Okay, so we've talked about why webcasts and webinars work. We've talked about the market. We've talked about why they're at the level of engagement that they are. So let's take a little bit of time and talk about how do you take this technology. What do you need to think about with this technology, and how do you implement it if you're looking at getting in this environment, or perhaps you're already in this environment? What are things that you can do to further engage and further build upon where you might be currently doing business in a virtual event type of a marketplace? You'll always need to start out with the very basic marketing questions like we were just talking about, but in order to get to that transparency that I was just talking about, in order to get to that kind of a level, you need to take those marketing questions and then realize that there's a technological aspect to what we're doing. So in terms of understanding your audience, you're now going to be asking questions about the technical ramifications of who your audience might be. And that's really where you need to start out when you're talking about adopting this technology. These are some things that you can usually talk about and think about in terms of getting to understand who your audience is from a demographic, technological standpoint. Who is your audience that you're trying to connect to? Are they business professionals that might be in a professional environment in an office place somewhere? And if that's the case, are there restrictions to possibly downloading software in their environments where they're at? Are there servers or environments that might potentially block a streaming signal? Those are things that you need to think through, again, to assess your audience and assess how this technology is going to work into reaching and communicating with that group of people. Flip side of the coin would be if your audience is more of a maybe work from home or an older demographic audience. Are there therefore low bandwidth connections that you might need to think about too? And if that's the case, is it more case that you need to think about having something that's fairly elegant and fairly streamlined that can then reach that audience without that technological possible hiccup of a low bandwidth connection? Even things like, are they Mac or PC users? That's a little bit cliche nowadays, but it's still something that's good for you to think through. It helps to identify who your market is, and it helps to identify who you're trying to reach and how you're going to reach them through this technology. Overall, the last point here on the slide of your general comfort level with technology, in a lot of ways that can be mostly looked at as a generational type of a question. Again, it's equally important when you assess who your demographic is going to be. If it's a younger demographic, they will probably take to this technology as second nature. And you can think about having more interactive and more collaborative type of environments. If it's an older demographic, you might need to push to streamline the technology so that it's a little bit more adaptable to a marketplace and to a target that might be not quite as comfortable as a younger demographic, coming into this type of a meeting and an environment. Identify the technology that best communicates to your potential audience. That's really what we're trying to do. Trying to find how is going to be the best way for you to connect to your audience. Okay? That's really what we're looking to do. So now that we've talked a little bit about that, we've talked about the market, we've talked about how you can start to address and apply this technology, how you can learn about what your audience is going to be and how best to communicate. Let's take a few minutes and talk about some of the pieces of the virtual event puzzle. There's obviously many more pieces than what we've got time to talk through today, obviously, with you, but I wanted to call out specifically 4 key pieces of the puzzle that when people are coming into this environment, these are typically things that are oftentimes overlooked, and they're incredibly important. So, and that would be the initial marketing, how you're reaching to your audience, the registration system that you're driving your audience to, what you can reasonably expect your returns to be, as well as platform technology. Platform technology being the tools and the platform that you're going to choose to best communicate and collaborate with your audience online. The goal of the initial marketing, actually the goal of everything that we're trying to do up until this point, from the initial marketing through the registration page, is instilling that drive with that viewer to hit that submit button. To hit that register button is what we want them to do. Okay? Everything you do when you design this has to be laid out with that goal in mind. And probably the biggest thing that you can do is in regards to finding your hook. What is it that you're going to talk about in your webinar? You can't just have something that's just going to be a very basic informational webinar or webcast. You need to find something. You need to find a topic or an issue. What's a trend in your environment that you can solve, and you can provide that knowledge to an attendee and talk about that. Lay that out clearly, distribute and call out that information in your marketing materials to really hook that audience in. That's really the key of what we're trying to do. If you're able to bring in experts in your market that can add credibility to your campaign, obviously that helps as a way to further add validity to what you're trying to do, and that can also be a part of the hook too, depending on who you're able to bring into. I mentioned a few minutes ago about using the data mining tools to help quantify and learn about your potential audience and who your target demographic is, and that really needs to start with the initial marketing efforts that you might be doing. In today's day and age, everything is trackable, everything is monitorable, and you really need to take that and apply that to what you're trying to do to learn about what's going to be working, what doesn't work. Using things like tracking codes, for instance, to be able to tell what leads are generating the most return to the registration page, so that you know when you do this the next time and the next time, you're able to fine-tune that. You're able to learn what's resonating the most with your potential audience. Lastly, creating that HTML content, the branding is incredibly important as well. There's a lot of platforms and available tools in the marketplace that will allow you to set up an email reminder or an email invitation, for instance, and you put in your title, you put in your description, you upload your list, and you send it out. And those work. They work fine. But really in today's day of email saturation, what you might be gaining in terms of simplicity and ease of use, you're probably losing in overall registration returns, because you really need to have something that is going to grab them visually, along with that hook that we were just talking about. In finding people that can work with you, or finding companies that you can partner with, or finding the technology yourself that really allows you to create visuals that are going to pop out and stand out, are really important to do. This is a survey, this is from, again, the 1080 group, that talked about the initial marketing invitation, and this is directed to people, professional webinar promoters and users of this technology, talking about what tools do they typically use to promote their webinars, and therefore how would they rate the effectiveness of what they're using. And you can see on the far right side of this chart here, emails by far and away the most heavily used, and even now still viewed as the most effective. I think we would all probably make the argument that emails are at the point of saturation, but you can see the degree of emphasis and usage that most people still use webinar or emails for. Websites obviously coming in on second there. Anything you can do online obviously is a good key to do. Banners, blogs, anything like that to really drum up attention and drive interest is always key and good to use when you're looking at creating a buzz about what you're doing. And that gets also back to the data mining we were talking about, the tracking codes. You need to know what's working. You need to know if your banner ads are working, or if your invitations are working better, or whatever it happens to be. You need to be able to know that, and that's very key when you're talking about using online ways to promote what you're trying to do. And look where social media is on this chart here, coming in third here at just above 40%. That's only going to grow. That's only going to increase as more and more things become incorporated in a social environment. More and more people are going to be using this as an effective tool to promote your webinars. And I would definitely encourage you to, if you're not in this, if you're looking at ways to get your head above the crowd and stand out, social media is going to be the way to do it. And really, as email probably lessens in effectiveness as this market continues to evolve and grow, social media is probably going to increase relative to the amount or to the diminishing effectiveness of emails. So definitely keep your mind and your attention in social marketing as you're looking to do this. Okay, real quick, the registration system obviously is that continuation of the initial marketing campaign that you've set up. Again, the goal on the registration page is to get the attendee to hit that submit button. So it's got to be concise, it's got to be elegant, it's got to be professional, minimal data fields so that you're not asking your potential registrants to enter everything that they know about themselves, but really just what you need to know. And you're reinforcing all of that you've started to the initial campaign. If you are able to bring in, the market rock stars of your marketplace, you're using their involvement to reinforce what you're talking about in the topic. The registration page is also a great way and place to describe to the attendees what are they going to get when they actually attend your event. That gets back to the what's in it for me kind of mentality. PowerPoint, PDFs, takeaways, white papers, anything like that you can give them so that they know there's a concrete understanding of what they're going to gain by attending your webinar is going to help you to drive actual registrations. Session length, equally important as well. Be very clear on what you are asking of their time so that they know and that they're going to buy into that. And then therefore, obviously, as you all know, when you submit a registration system, you get the confirmation emails. And those, again, just continuing that wave of motion and of progress that you've set up from that initial campaign to create that urgency at this point to actually attend the event. So have calendar invites in your Outlook email or in your emails so that when they click on it, they can simply add that to their Outlook, and then there's a reminder that pops up 15 minutes before the event. Those are great tools to use to help drive actual attendance. Anything you can do to that to instill that urgency at this point to get them to attend is going to be helpful for you in the long run. This real quick is a study that talks about what are some of the factors that would affect a person's really likelihood to hit that submit button. This is from a scale of 1 to 5. And you can see at the very top topic, 4.5 out of 5 as one of the largest likely factor to influence someone to actually register and attend your event. So that gets back to that finding the hook that we were just talking about a minute ago. Really digging in and realizing what's going to grab your audience is really where you have to start. And then through farther on down the list there's a whole smattering of some of the things that I've been talking about as well in terms of what are the attendees going to get out of it? Who's speaking? Am I going to get a PowerPoint presentation after the end or a PDF of the slides? How long is it going to be? Look where that's at on this chart here too. So again, reinforcing what we've talked about, that's what you want to concern and what you want to really concentrate on to get the registrations and then to hopefully drive as many registrations to actually attend. That's really what your emphasis has to be. And the reason that I wanted to spend a couple minutes here talking about this is in what you can expect to get out of a registration system. And if you've never seen numbers that reflect this, it's a little bit disheartening when you first take a look at it, but it's important to understand what the industry typical averages that you can expect are going to be, and that's why this is so important. On average, and this does vary, but on average, industry-wide, you can expect an actual return rate of 1 to 2% of your invited attendees will actually hit that submit button on your registration page. 1 to 2%. So roughly 98% of the people that you might be sending invitations to and you might be trying to get to, your message is not going to resonate to them. And that's why it's so incredibly important that you develop these materials ahead of time and you're not just slapping something together. It's got to be something that's going to hook, and it's got to be something that elevates itself above the chatter that is out there all over, in terms of email marketing and stuff like that. And once they do register, industry-wide, typically 35 to 45% of the people that actually register are actually going to attend. So when you're actually in the webinar, you can expect that you're going to lose probably at least 50% of the audience. And I was talking to someone yesterday that was making the case that even these numbers are actually fairly optimistic. But this is fairly close to what we've seen when we've looked at this market and what we expect to return. So there are ways to improve this. There are ways to get a better return, but it all does go back to building and starting off correctly from the very beginning when you're looking at implementing this kind of a program. And we always are looking at webinars not in a linear fashion from a start to finish, but we're looking at webinars from the standpoint of a cyclical process where you're growing and you're pushing that momentum to gain and to return better averages as you build your campaign and you build your brand basically online. And it's through that consistency that you begin to know who your target market is, and you can find ways to exceed what these industry averages are pointing out to.
Are those industry averages on complimentary webinars or paid?
That's a very good question, and these industry averages are on complimentary webinars. That's actually a very good question, and I've seen research that points to the best returns. This is kind of interesting to think about when you first hear this, but on average, the best returned or the best attended webinars are actually paid webinars. There's obviously skin in the game. If you're able to drive the value to a potential attendee to actually pay to attend and to learn or to hear what you're doing, those typically have the best returns. So, yeah, great question. It's something that is interesting when you take a step back and look at that as you go through. Any other questions about that? Okay. So, platform technology, this is something I think John and I could probably sit and talk all day about platform technology. But it really is key, and this is one of the things that when we start talking to people about what we do for a business, the platform technology is really where we look to address and develop and learn what we were talking about in terms of the audience, your market, and find the right technology that's going to solve what you're looking to accomplish. It's important not to just go out and just willy-nilly pick a platform and try to fit your attendees or your goals into that platform, but it's more important to assess what your needs are and then find what's going to work for that solution. There's hundreds of solutions out there, and finding what's going to work for you is really going to pay off in the long term. And these are some of the things that you can typically think through when you're talking through how is the platform going to work and what are going to be some of the needs that this technology can help me with. Consider streaming versus download, for instance. That's a little bit less of an issue. As I'm sure all of you know, everything is going to streaming. A lot of movement and emphasis is on that streaming environment. So that's a little bit less of an issue, but it's still valid. If you're in a part of a larger enterprise-wide company, a lot of the marketplace is still in a download type of a platform, but it's something that will help you to think through when you're talking about your audience and who you're trying to connect with. Attendance size, what are some of the tools? John's got some great best practices that I know he's going to walk through that are helping you to kind of assess what's going to be best for you to use. Collaborative tools, as we talked, are really key to this technology. It's really key to establishing that level of transparency and engagement with your potential audience. So figuring out what you want, breakouts, figuring out how they're going to work within what you're trying to accomplish is really key to determining what's going to be the right technology. We haven't really talked any so far today about archives or recordings of the events, but those are another key value of what webinars and webcasts can provide you. In a way to pick up some of that lost registration, that archive is truly key. And there's a lot of data out that suggests that the shelf life of an archive is relatively short. And by that I mean that a majority of people that are going to view, if they've missed your event, a majority of people that are actually going to come in and view the archive are going to do it within the first week of the actual event. And of that first week, a majority of those people are going to do it usually within 72 hours or 48 hours even of the actual event. So it's key that when you're looking at developing and finding the technology that you partner with someone that can have that archive ready almost instantly, you know, so that it's out there and you can take advantage of that that wave that's going to rapidly diminish after your event's gone over. And think about how that potential attendee is going to access that replay. How are they going to get to it? Are you able to take a download of that replay and post it where you can then track who's actually attending it, or is it something that they go back to the platform? Think through that so that when you're done, you've got a great way to drive that those people that are going to view the archive as a way to view the information that they might not have seen in actual attendance on the event day itself. When the event's over, it's not really over. It's never really over. Getting back to what I was talking about having this being a cyclical process, really the end point should be viewed as just the beginning to develop into the next campaign, the next thing that you're trying to build up to. Post-event emails to the attendees are key. So when you've done your registration, you've now got identifiable buckets of people that attended and didn't attend. You're going to want to send a very good professional email out to those people or communication out to those people that's targeted to that group. You know, those that didn't attend, we're sorry we missed you. Here's a link to the replay. Click on it, view the replay. Those that attended, we're happy that you attended. Here's a link to the replay. Here's a calendar of events. Actually, you could do that for both of those categories. Here's a calendar of events that talks about what we've got coming up. Drive that momentum to the next potential campaign that you've got, so you've got that cyclical process. Getting back to the lead generation, the ROI, plug that into your sales teams. Plug that into your development staff so that you've got those warm leads that you're able to follow up on. Fine-tune your contact lists and really keep that momentum rolling to your next event as you're rolling through. Okay? Real quickly, I'd be loath not to have a single slide or talk a little bit about sponsorship in this environment. Those of you that are with associations, you understand the value of sponsorships. Obviously, it's core to a lot of what you do, and it can be core to what webinars can do for you on a virtual environment too. And really the value and the return of a sponsorship level is very similar on an online event as it is with a physical event as well. So definitely think about that sponsorship abilities that you might be able to bring in that can help add that visibility and can help add that quality and that ability to add your campaign and maximize having a sponsorship be a part of what you're trying to do online. Maybe that helps you bring in that market rock star that can help really talk about the trends and analysis. A lot of the value that a sponsor is going to see in an online event is equal to what they would typically see on an actual live in-person event. So don't discredit the value of sponsorship when you're talking about moving this to an online environment. Okay, John's going to talk about some best practices here. So John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Which button advances
the
slides?
right
The right
one. Here you go.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi folks, my name is John Janeshig, and I run a company called World to Worlds, which is presently involved in building virtual events, both in web-based and 3D platforms. But for many years, I worked for United Business Media and more recently for Ziff Davis Enterprise, which are on any given day the #1 and #2 producer of webinars in the world. They brought webinars many years ago in very innovative ways to the B2B technology space in the Americas and in Europe. And they continue to innovate in these spaces. I belabor this both to substantiate the fact that, when I talk to you, you're talking to a person who has participated in, provided core technology for, solved problems around, and or moderated hundreds and hundreds of webinars. But also because I strongly advocate working with companies like UBM, ZDE, or publishers pertinent to your topic areas of interest, because these people are experts in driving traffic, audience, and registering people, which, as Aaron said, are absolutely critical components of success in this market. You have to sweat that as much as you have to sweat everything else. In fact, the top line of that slide with the histogram of why people click on register, that shows pretty clearly that it's the hook that hooks them in most cases, is exactly the same psychology that they teach editors at major online publishing companies, where these publications live and die online in terms of the traffic that they can organically draw from search engines like Google, all of which is dependent on writing a fabulous hook for everything, for every article they publish. Beyond this, what I'm really going to do is emphasize some of the stuff that Aaron said from a kind of a person who does it every day and enterprise customer perspective. Planning around these things is absolutely everything. And what we're talking about here, as Aaron said at the beginning, while it looks like a simple technology, is actually the core technology, the core experiential technology, or clusters of technology that lie at the center of everything that you'll see at the rest of this show. All of these web virtual event platforms are essentially envelopes around webinar technology. So what you're really talking about in terms of the core of delivering value, the core of experience for the audience, is a webinar experience. It may have some cosmetic differences from something that might honestly represent itself as a webinar. Webinar's a little homely now, a little old school. But fundamentally, you're dealing with a webinar out here. You may be dealing with an envelope that's delivering 6 or 10 or 12 or 50 webinars to a large and diverse audience all at the same time. But fundamentally, everybody who's attending your event is attending a webinar when they're absorbing your content. For that reason, it's important to master these technologies regardless of whether you intend to employ them in their pure and simple form or in more elaborate forms as made possible by the enveloping technologies that you'll see elsewhere at VES. One of the elements of planning that I often see enterprise customers not do adequately is to define key roles. Obviously, they all decide who's going to speak. Sometimes they decide clearly who's going to moderate up front, but then they fail to fill, or they fill in nebulous or understaffed ways the rest of the roles that are germane to success, in these environments. Quite a few warm bodies are actually needed to bring one of these things off successfully. Obviously, you need the people who are speaking, and they need to have their materials, and those materials need to be produced according to the technological constraints and or limitations that may be present on the webinar platform that you've chosen to use. Beyond that, you need people who are available and well-trained on the platform to do audience and speaker support, to train the speakers on the platform and to rehearse them, to solve individual technical difficulties that people may have, which may or may not include the ability to service people separately via IM, chat, or even telephone, depending on the kind of profile and budget that you have around a webinar product. You need people whose job is partly or ideally exclusively simply to watch the technology. If you can find someone to sit behind a PC in a position that approximates the watcher's position, and this is particularly important because in many cases you'll be delivering these things through firewalls to large enterprise audiences, for example, to a sales team. If you can have somebody inside that firewall watching the experience that people are actually having, instead of simply assuming that what someone sees on the open internet is exactly the same as what someone will see behind 6 layers of firewall is critical, because it will give you the opportunity to halt a free fall and fix problems in course.
John, can I
yep.
ask a question? Is this person that you're describing that's doing all this someone on my staff, or is it someone that the platform provider is going to have? Is this somebody I have to have trained in all this?
I would say you have the choice. I think that many platform providers, certainly not all, because this is increasingly a technology that's becoming commoditized and being delivered in self-service forms, and of course at tempting price points, which is why that looks nice to customers. Obviously, in a situation where you're dialing in your own webinar remotely on a website, you may not even be in a face-to-face sales relationship with a platform provider. I mean, there are adequate white label webinar systems from people like Ustream. They call their system Watershed. It's a fabulous system, but unless you're a programmer, forget about using it. On the other hand, if you are a programmer and you are staffed to do it, it's extraordinarily powerful, and you can use it to deliver magical webinars inside the web envelopes that you set up. So, part of planning is to determine where the warm bodies and where the skill sets are going to come from. I think at this point the commoditization curve of these technologies is such that the cost of that providers should not necessarily, except at outset, be burdened with the cost of servicing your audience. That most companies will need to develop these skills internally, the same way that most companies have, since the advent of desktop publishing, developed the ability to lay out their own graphics or update their own homepage or something. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're building their core sites all by themselves without any outsourced assistance, but once a system is in place, maintaining that system day to day and operating it, is probably most cost effectively pursued by the enterprise itself. You need people who are minding the process of delivering questions and prioritizing questions from the audience to speakers, possibly proposing and promoting seed questions in order to get a conversation started, because obviously conversation is one of the ways that you're going to be able to measure feedback, identify warm leads, and even do such esoteric things as keyword analysis on questions to determine relevance and lead quality in individual cases. And for the sanity of your provider, if you are dealing with a provider who's not a cold machine like Ustream Watershed, and who really cares about your success, it's lovely to do them the courtesy of having a single point of contact within your organization, and some single person who's empowered to make decisions at the top of the chain. Ultimately, these are putting on webinars. It's the same as putting on any kind of show. Ultimately, people have to make decisions about what the presentation is going to contain, and where the lights are going to be, and who's going to be providing the video streaming services, and so on. And making this a slow and non-agile process will bog things down, and ultimately, I think, detract from the quality of the final product. As I just said to Donna, there are plenty of people out there. Many firms are competent in providing these technologies, either as platforms or as facilitators for other people's platforms. There's a good deal of talent from which to draw in the market. Draw on it. These things are just hard enough and just complicated enough that regardless of your ostensible familiarity, maybe even with the individual component technologies involved, being able to carry on a Skype conversation with your friends does not mean that you can put on a webinar. And it really is the same technologies at work, but they are so different in application and in multi-user circumstances that you can easily fool yourself into thinking that you've got all the bases covered when you really don't. Regardless, once you've made a platform selection, and you should be going through an RFQ process, maybe iterating an RFQ process to do that, please. Okay. You should drill yourself on it and practice your people. You should try every feature. You should attend other people's webinars. You should steal their good ideas. And you should, if possible, give private webinars yourself to your team. If you're training a team, actually working the platform to deliver a product is the way to do it. You might as well not victimize clients or your key rock star speakers in the process of learning. Obviously, you have to work the technology options that will constrain your platform and your ability to deliver in any given circumstance. Most platforms have some flexibility in delivery methods. You can always, for example, fall back on a plain old telephone audio conference for an audio backplane for a webinar, which is sometimes very convenient and sometimes indeed the only way to do things. These days, it's rational to start thinking about making a choice between Flash video, which is extremely efficient but not necessarily firewall friendly, and HTML5 native video formats, 264 formats and other formats, which may be more firewall friendly ultimately. Delivery on mobile devices is becoming important. Certainly Android devices and tablets are able to consume Flash natively and actually provide a very nice experience for webinars these days. I was doing a webinar the other day and I was fooling around with an Android tablet as a recipient station and it worked great. But obviously diverse stuff like the iPhone will not do so well in a Flash environment. You have to research situational limitations on your desired audience. If 2/3 of your potential audience is on 7-year-old Lenovo laptops behind a shared T1, they will not be able to consume streams and do a Flash display and so on. You're going to have to either figure out workarounds or get them to connect from home or other stuff. And in my experience, it's best to bite that bullet up front and see if it and in some cases it may mean that webinars are not an appropriate platform for delivery, or you may have to do something theatrical, or actually fly to see people, or do something else. But it's best, just in terms of general cost savings, to assess whether webinars can be used to deliver to the particular audience you're interested in reaching. It's often possible to provide what we call a forked experience or address a lowest common denominator, but a forked experience can be interesting where some people are just looking at the slides and listening to a thin audio stream and the rest of the people are consuming the video. Some, if not all platforms, can be tweaked into doing this, and this can let you get around bandwidth and firewall limitations in fairly effective ways. Back to registration again, I don't think we need to go over this. I am a huge believer in sweating registration and sweating all of the emails and, if possible, implementing single sign-on and working with experts in audience generation to do so. Audience generation is the name of the game here. Yep. Designing the program, remember that presenting via webinar is not like live, and it can be very, very difficult. In fact, one of the most difficult human factors things you will always encounter, particularly when you're working with speakers who do not do webinars all the time, is in convincing your rock star speakers who are terrific on stage that presenting for a tiny little video camera to a remote audience is a completely different experience and actually requires a different approach to production of materials as well as personal affect. In fact, I am a much more experienced webinar a deliverer than I am a real-world public speaker, and I'm sure that's evident to most of you from my relative lack of affect. My voice is doing relatively interesting things, but my body is not, And a good public speaker these days walks back and forth and uses a wireless mic and so on, Practice is the benefit here, and then evaluate all the features of the platform, and every platform has different features, and they're all implemented in different ways. For beginning and then maintaining that conversation with the audience, I'm a huge believer myself in unmoderated live chat. There are people who are terrified of the concept of exposing their speakers or their customers to the notion of someone sneaking into a webinar who's working for a competitor and asking the difficult questions that people don't really want to answer. Honestly, in hundreds and hundreds of webinars with open chat, I've never seen that happen even once. So I think that is a red herring. What people will remember from an event is the quality of the hot engagement that they have experienced at the event. So consider that and use all of those other features both to extract information, which can be used for additional layers of qualification on the audience that you've gotten to register, and also to fix ideas in their minds and to punctuate the presentation, because someone droning on slide after slide, as we've been doing here, is not perhaps the most interesting thing in the world, and actually to make sure that they're still awake. In fact, there's quite a science developing in webinars using interactives of one sort or another to ensure that people are attending to the content. And plan ROI in from the start. Aaron went over all of this. You have to look at what kind of metrics come out of your system, and you have to look at how they relate to the business problems that you want to solve, and how they can be used to qualify customers. You have to decide whether you want to get into higher order analytic metrics, whether you have enough data to do that. And you have to make a concrete plan and then implement it immediately in terms of who will get the leads and what will happen to them. I have seen dozens of cases where people spend a huge amount of money doing a show, and the minute the show closes, that is essentially the end of the process. Those leads go into a diffuse funnel, maybe. They're delivered, certainly, but nobody really does anything specific with them. There's no specific plan to follow up with a specific turnaround related to the specific content of the presentation. In other words, you have an opportunity to continue relating to these people around the topic of the presentation, but many, many, many people don't do it, and I think that many sales are left on the floor as a result. So, back to you.
Okay, well, hopefully, I know we've given a lot of material here, but hopefully, as John was just saying, the name of the game is to really plan ahead of time and make sure that you've got your ducks in a row when you're getting into this environment. And that's really when you're going to be able to engage and get the strong return of your investment that a webinar and a webcast can really provide to you. Webinars, they're universally adopted, they've come of age, they're here to stay, and as John reiterated a minute ago, even with some of the more advanced technologies, the content delivery, which is again what we've been talking about, the content delivery is where the true key to this value lies, and that's within the webinar environment, the webcast environment. So make use of that technology. And as businesses continue, they're always going to find ways to engage people more and more. Social media, more and more targeted, granular marketing. Webinars and webcasts, they have the ability to provide that granular attention and really fine-tuning to that target market. So make sure you're using that technology, and we encourage you to use that technology. And collaboration is king. That's really what it boils down to. This ability to engage on a two-way form of communication, to get out of that passive engagement with your potential customers or clients and have that robust two-way communication and collaboration is really where things are going, and that's how you can use this technology. Okay? We'd be happy to answer any questions if we've got any time left. But thank you very much for being here with us today. Do we have any other questions, Don, or are we done? Okay, great. Here's our contact information, so feel free to give us a call if there's anything, or shoot us an email or whatever if there's anything that we can help you with. Thank you very much for your time.